A teenage girl sits on a low wooden stool in a one-room house in a hill town nobody important has ever visited. She is mending the seam of a garment. The light is golden, almost ordinary. And then the room fills with light not from a lamp, from nowhere she can name. A figure stands before her and she cannot breathe. "Fear not," the figure says. You know that moment. You have lived something like it. The phone call that changes everything. The diagnosis, the letter, the silence after a question you cannot take back. The moment when your chest tightens and your thoughts scatter like birds, and you are convinced, absolutely convinced that you will not survive this. And in that moment, someone speaks. A voice, a hand, a word. 2 words, actually. For 2,000 years, people have tried to count how many times those 2 words appear in the Bible. They tell you the number is 365. One for every day of the year. A promise for each sunrise. They are wrong. The actual count is higher, but more importantly, they have missed the point entirely. This is not a story about a number. This is not a story about a verse to memorize or a doctrine to defend. This is a story about every time the God of the universe leaned down to a terrified human being and spoke 2 words into the worst moment of their life. Stay with me. Most of us have heard those words before. Fear not, in Christmas carols, in greeting cards, in church services, usually delivered with a gentle smile by someone who clearly has never been genuinely afraid. We have flattened those words. We have made them soft. Greeting cards soft. Safe. They are not safe words. They are emergency words. They are the words God speaks when you have already given up. When you are already drowning. When you are already holding the knife. When you are already convinced that this is the end. Here's what you probably think it means when God says, "Fear not." You think it means, "Don't worry. Nothing bad will happen. Everything will be fine. You are safe. You are wrong." And understanding what it actually means will change how you read every story in the Bible. It will change how you read your own life. Let me show you. We're going to walk through the moments when God spoke those 2 words. We're going to see who heard them, and we're going to watch what happened next. And I promise you, by the end, you will never hear "fear not" the same way again. Let's start with Abraham. Abraham is 99 years old. His wife Sarah is 90. They have been married for 75 years. And God comes to Abraham one day and makes him a promise. "I will give you a son, a child, an heir." Everything Abraham has wanted his entire life. Abraham believes. Abraham waits. And then Sarah becomes pregnant, and then Isaac is born. Isaac is the answer to every prayer Abraham has ever prayed. Isaac is the son of the promise. Isaac is the future, and one day, God appears to Abraham and says, "Take your son, your only son, the one you love, go to the land of Moriah and kill him." Think about that. Take the promise of your life. Take the answer to your 75-year prayer. Take the child who was supposed to be impossible and end it. You can imagine Abraham's mind. You can feel what his hands were shaking. We are told in Genesis that Abraham rose early the next morning. Not because he had resolved to obey, but because he could not sleep. Because sleep was impossible. He packed the wood for the sacrifice. He saddled his donkey. He took his son. And they walked. Genesis says they walked for 3 days. 3 days of walking beside your son, knowing what you believe you have to do. 3 days of Isaac asking, "Father, where is the lamb for the sacrifice?" 3 days of Abraham having no answer. They reach the mountain. Abraham builds an altar. He takes the wood. He places it on the altar. And then he binds his son. He binds Isaac's hands and feet. He places his son on the wood, and he raises the knife. And in that moment, the moment his hand is raised, God speaks, "Fear not, Abraham, not. I was only testing you, not I never wanted you to do this." First, before the explanation, before the angel and the ram, the first thing God says is, "Fear not," because Abraham is terrified. Abraham is at the absolute limit of what a human being can endure. And that is the exact moment God speaks. Here's what Abraham was afraid of. He was afraid that the promise was a lie, that he had wasted 75 years waiting for a delusion. That God was not who Abraham thought he was. That obedience led to loss, not blessing. And God doesn't say, "You're right, everything is fine now." God says, "Fear not." Not "fear not" because I'm taking back my command. But fear not. Abraham, your identity is not determined by your terror. Abraham's hands are shaking, his faith is being unmade, and in that exact moment God's voice arrives, not before the fear, after Abraham's fear is complete. Moses stands at the edge of the Red Sea. Pharaoh's chariots are closing in behind him, the Egyptian army, thousands of soldiers, and in front of him is a wall of water. Behind him is an army. Beside him are 600,000 Israelites, all of them screaming at him. "Why did you bring us here to die, Moses? We were slaves, yes, but at least we were alive." Moses is terrified, and God speaks, "Fear not." Joshua is standing outside the city of Jericho. He has just become the leader of Israel. He has no military experience. He is leading people into a hostile land against fortified cities. The stakes are impossible. The odds are impossible. And God speaks to Joshua, "Fear not. Be strong and courageous." The pattern is beginning to show itself, isn't it? Here's what most people miss about these moments. God doesn't say fear, not to prevent fear. He says it inside the fear. He arrives in the moment when the person is already terrified. And then there's Mary. Mary is a teenage girl. She lives in Nazareth, a hill town in Galilee. Rome has occupied her country. Her people are suffering under foreign rule. She is engaged to a carpenter named Joseph. She has probably never left her village. She has probably never seen anything outside the ordinary rhythm of a small Galilean town. And one day an angel appears in her house. Not gently, not softly, the angel Gabriel appears. And the first thing he says is, "Hail, full of grace," which is not a greeting, which is a theophany, which is a divine announcement that terrifies her, and Mary is afraid. We're told in Luke that she was troubled by this greeting, which is ancient Greek for absolute terror. She cannot process what is happening. She is 17 years old, and something divine has entered her room, and she is convinced she is about to die. "Fear not, Mary," Gabriel says. And then Gabriel tells her she is going to bear a son, the Son of God, the Messiah, which is not a comfort, Mary. That's a revolutionary claim that will get her killed if she claims it publicly. That's a pregnancy that will destroy her reputation. That's exile or stoning or scandal. But the first thing Gabriel says is not, "This will be easy," or "everyone will understand." The first thing Gabriel says is, "Fear not," in the exact moment of her terror. Do you see the pattern yet? Peter is drowning. It is night, a storm. The disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. And the wind is fierce and the waves are tall and Peter is terrified. And then he sees something moving across the water, a figure walking on the water. At first, Peter is more terrified because he thinks it's a ghost. But then he realizes it's Jesus. And Peter, in a moment of desperate faith, says, "Lord, if it is you, tell me to come to you on the water." And Jesus says, "Come." So Peter steps out of the boat and he walks on the water. For a moment, Peter is actually walking toward Jesus on the water. It's impossible, and it's happening. But then Peter looks at the waves. He looks at the wind, he feels the storm, and Peter is afraid. The impossible becomes impossible again, and Peter sinks. And as he's sinking, he cries out, "Lord, save me," and Jesus reaches out and catches him. And the first thing Jesus says to him is, "Why did you doubt?" Fear not, not you failed, not you shouldn't have doubted. The first thing Jesus says is, "Fear not." This is the pattern. Over and over, Abraham, Moses, Joshua, Mary, Peter, all of them terrified. All of them in the moment of maximum human collapse, and all of them hearing the same two words, "Fear not." But what does that mean? What is God actually saying? The early church wrestled with this question. Augustine, one of the greatest Christian thinkers who ever lived, wrote in his Confessions that fear is the primary barrier between a human being and obedience to God. Fear locks us into our smallness. Fear convinces us that our circumstances are larger than God. Fear makes us believe we are the center of the story, and everything revolves around our survival. God's "fear not" is not a denial of danger. It's a reclassification. It's God saying, "Yes, you are terrified. Yes, the danger is real, but your fear no longer determines your next step." Abraham didn't stop being afraid when God said, "Fear not," but his fear stopped controlling him. Peter didn't become fearless, but he got out of the water. The disciples didn't feel instantly safe, but they kept going. Here's what I'm saying. God's voice in the moment of your maximum terror is not a promise that the terror will disappear. It's a promise that you are not abandoned in it. John is an old man. He has outlived all of the apostles. He has seen the church grow. He has also seen Christians tortured, burned, crucified. He has written his gospel. He is taught for decades, and then Rome arrests him and exiles him to an island called Patmos. Patmos is a rocky, volcanic island in the Aegean Sea. It is barren, it is a prison. John is alone there, and one day while he is praying, he hears a voice behind him, a voice like a trumpet, a voice like thunder. "Write what you see," the voice says. And John turns, and he sees a vision, the most violent, terrifying vision in all of Scripture. He sees the heavens open. He sees angels. He sees seals being broken. He sees a white horse. He sees plagues. He sees beasts rising from the sea. He sees judgment coming to the earth. And John is absolutely terrified. We're told that John falls on his face before the vision, not kneeling, not praying, prostrate, completely overwhelmed, absolutely convinced that he's about to die. And that's when a hand touches him. And that's when the voice speaks again. "Fear not, I am the first and the last. I am the living one. I was dead, and behold, I am alive forever and ever, and I hold the keys of death and Hades." It's Jesus, the same Jesus who walked on water, the same Jesus who spoke to Mary, the same Jesus whose voice echoes through 2,000 years of human terror. And Jesus says, "Fear not. Not the vision is not real, not nothing bad will happen." Jesus says, "I am alive, I hold death, you are safe with me." Here's why this matters. John's vision is of judgment. It's of the end times. It's of destruction. And right in the middle of the worst vision in all of Scripture, Jesus appears and says, "Fear not, not because the world becomes safe. The world is still broken. The end times still come. Pain and suffering still continue. But in the middle of it all, in the middle of your worst fear, the God of the universe leans down and speaks two words. Fear not." Abraham heard it when the knife was raised. Moses heard it when the army was closing in. Joshua heard it when the odds were impossible. Mary heard it when her world was being unmade. Peter heard it when he was drowning. And John heard it in the middle of the end. And the voice never changed. For 2,000 years, one voice has been speaking in humanity's darkest hours. The same voice, the same promise. Fear not, not fear won't come. But fear is not the last word. So what does this mean for you? First, fear is real. This is important. The Bible never denies that. The people in these stories, Abraham, Mary, Peter, John, they weren't spiritually mature enough to transcend fear. They were terrified, genuinely terrified. The Bible does not ask you to pretend you're not afraid. It asks you to understand that your fear is not your identity. Your fear is not your final word. Your fear is real. But it does not determine your next move. Second, God's voice arrives in your terror. Not before it. This is the pattern you've seen through every story. God doesn't prevent the scary moments. God arrives in them, which means right now, in whatever you are most afraid of, in the moment you are most convinced that it's over, that you can't survive it, that you are abandoned, God is nearer than you think, not preventing your fear, but present in it, a voice in the dark, a hand reaching out. Two words. Fear not. Third, for 2,000 years, God has been saying the same two words in humanity's darkest hours, to Abraham, to Mary, to Peter, to John, to the disciples hiding in locked rooms, to the martyrs in Roman arenas, to the faithful in every century, in every culture, in every imaginable circumstance of human terror, and He is saying them still to you now. In this moment, in the worst moment you can imagine, the God of the universe is leaning down and speaking to your terrified heart and saying, "Fear not. Not everything will work out. Not you will never suffer. Not bad things won't happen. But I am here. I am alive. I am with you, and your fear, as real as it is, will not destroy you." That is the story. That is the promise. That is the two-word sermon preached across 2,000 years of human history, in moments of absolute human collapse, by the God who loves you. Fear not.